I got a lot of things to say about the SEC. We're post-spring now, and let's just take a snapshot of the whole thing. Like, here's what I think about some of these teams. Georgia, I think Carson Beck is the most important football player in the conference this year. Because if I knew nothing more about the SEC this year than Carson Beck's going to play at an A- or better level, I wouldn't need to know anything else. That's the best team in the conference. They're going to win it and may go on to win it all. If Carson Beck does nothing more, if I know nothing more than that dude's just going to play to his full potential, he's going to justify everyone who's mocked him in the first round of the NFL draft next year, Georgia's good enough everywhere else. Georgia has got quarterback, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator. They got continuity across the board. It's one of, if not the best cultures in college football. They got a really good and probably underrated crop of receivers, and that includes the tight end position, and that includes that dude out of the backfield they got out of Florida. The number 5 offense last year, guys. Did you know that? That was the number 5 offense in the country. Scoring or yards, pick. They were number 5 in both. So I think Carson Beck is an extremely important player, the most important in the SEC. You may be able to say he's the most important player in the country because a lot of the hopes that any other team has of getting through the SEC to Atlanta and winning has to do with maybe there being a wobbly tire or something along those lines in Athens. If there isn't, it's going to be a tough out. Ole Miss 2024, I get the sense that some people think Ole Miss, no matter how highly they're ranked, are just a little more sizzle than they are steak. Like they're more gimmicky, but in time they'll be flushed out and the traditional big boys will be there at the end of the day. I actually think they're more than just sizzle this year. And that's going to be a struggle for some people to wrap their minds around because that doesn't mean there's not a bust potential here. Very high risk, high reward approach when you lean on the portal like they have, but they did lean. And they got the number 1 portal class. They brought in 8 blue chippers. They return elite players like Jackson Dart's back. That receiver room could be one of, if not the best in the countries. They added however many they're going to play the sport this year, one of the best in the country. They added several key defensive pieces. Defense, ironically, I think if they go on to maybe win this thing and go deep in the playoffs will be the reason why. They've got a workable schedule that opens against Furman and then Middle Tennessee, and they go to Wake Forest and Georgia Southern and Kentucky, South Carolina. You will probably not watch an Ole Miss game. Just speaking at random here. Got folks watching in San Diego tonight. I bet you guys don't see Ole Miss play a full game until maybe the LSU game October 12th. That's halfway through the season. And then the back half, you'll probably watch them against Oklahoma and Georgia and Florida. So it's workable. It's doable. I think Alabama, with all the Saban transition and with all the talk about what's going to happen long term, well, let's talk about 2024. Bama's got the 4th best odds to win the SEC in 2024. Georgia, Texas, Ole Miss above them, and then it's Alabama. And I think they need Kane Womack to be a superstar defensive coordinator. He was the head coach at South Alabama. DeBoer came in, hired him. We sat down with him when we went to Alabama for 20 minutes last month and talked to him a little bit more off camera. Love him. They need him to be a rock star this year. They're very young and inexperienced in the secondary. Now, they made some moves in the portal. Keon Saab, because it was in that first window, was a big move. They got Damani Jackson from USC. I heard him talking about the difference in a Southern Cal regular season game versus the Bama spring game the other day. That's always fun sound. Does the offense need time? That's where my mind wanders. I don't doubt offensively they'll eventually be a really good product, even in year one. I don't doubt that. Are they initially? And if they're not, can that defense step up and buy them some time? It's the post-Saban era. People are already going to be paying attention to how good they are defensively. But also, I remember following Washington last year. They played close game after close game after close game. Is that Bama in 2024? Colin, you have their schedule? Yes. Oh, man, synergy. They go to Wisconsin in week 3. They got Georgia in week 4. They go to Tennessee a few weeks later. Got Missouri. By the way, Missouri is sandwiched, not really because there's a bye week, but you got Missouri in between trips to Neyland and Tiger Stadium. They go to Oklahoma before the Iron Bowl. This just reeks of a schedule. It's got a bunch of one-possession games either way. Defense will probably end up deciding. Defense and turnovers. That's the name of the game. It'll probably end up deciding it. So I am on the record and continue to be as saying Bama upgraded their defensive staff. having said that, I watched the NFL draft along with you. You lose Kool-Aid, you lose Terry and Arnold, like you lose those kinds of guys. Uh, you don't just coach your way out of that. It takes some time. What about LSU? Speaking of LSU, Bama goes down there on November 9th. LSU's got an over-under win total of 9.5. And I got a question for you. Are we sure about LSU? This is me quite literally asking you. I love LSU. Backstory, I could argue a large part of what got this show where it is now is LSU. The 2019 LSU wave, we were early on, and we rode it, and LSU folks were there with us, and then CBS called shortly thereafter. So there is a very, very special place in my heart carved out for LSU. So I am asking you, sell me on LSU, because college football nerds, our buddies over there, who are the perennial you-know-what in the Punch Bowl this time of year. They did it again. They dropped a deuce in the Punch Bowl again the other day, but I don't think they made bad points. Here's what it says if you're listening on podcast. He said, or they said, because I never know which one of them it is. They said, honestly, we don't understand the 2024 LSU hype. They lost 4 starters from an all-time terrible defense. They lost their OC, their Heisman quarterback, and 2 first-round wide receivers, plus a starting offensive lineman. They needed 30-plus points to win half of their games from 2023. 4 of their 10 wins were Grambling, Georgia State, Army, and Mississippi State. They add USC and UCLA out of conference this year, and I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but I can't push back on any of that. I can't. And then they whiffed in the portal at defensive line, so their secondary is still a question. Garrett Nussmeier is going to be the hope here. So Garrett Nussmeier, here's what I keep coming back to. I think they made this point as well, but this is where my mind's been. Let's say Garrett Nussmeier is a great passer this year. You're still losing your best runner. Jaden Daniels not only was your best runner last year, I think he led the SEC in rushing. He was one of the best. In fact, he ended up better yards per carry than Cam Newton had been. So you're just kind of lost in the glow of he was a first rounder and he was a Heisman winner. Drill down to the specifics, man, you're losing a prolific runner. And even if the quarterback who fills his shoes is a great passer, Nussmeier's not changing the game on the ground. So do you have the horses in the backfield? You got the offensive tackles to pave the way. Do you have the horses in the backfield? And then can we answer all those other questions? Because 9.5 is the same win total Bama has. 9.5 is a really high win total. Should it be that high? I'm really asking because I would like you guys to sell me on it. What if Oklahoma's a little bit better than people think they are? Offensive line's been the thing everyone's talking about with Oklahoma. We still are. Offensive line at Oklahoma is one of the biggest questions of any major team in the country coming out of spring ball. But let's just say, because we can afford to do this in May, let's just say offensive line ends up being average to slightly above average for Oklahoma. Not a top 10 unit, but let's just say it's not a disaster like people think it's going to be. Well, that's one of the reasons their win total at FanDuel is only 7.5. The other reason is schedule. So I can't change the schedule, but let's just say that they don't have a terrible offensive line. Well, elsewhere, they could be pretty good. Elsewhere, Jackson Arnold, for all the doubt around him in the bowl game, I couldn't really care less about it. I think he'll be a really good player. I think there's a reason Dylan Gabriel found his way out to Eugene, Oregon, and the reason is Jackson Arnold was there. So Deion Burks, a very, very prolific addition via the portal, but they made several portal moves. They're one of our portal winners. They got an underrated wide receiver room, not just Deion Burks, an underrated wide receiver room, and yet they play 7 top 25 playoff odds teams. There's no actual poll out yet, but we go to FanDuel, we look at the team's odds to win the national title. Oklahoma plays 7 of them. But you only play 1 of them per week. You don't play a schedule, as Meemaw used to say. No one plays a schedule on Saturday. They play 1 team per Saturday. Well, if Oklahoma's got a better offensive line than we thought, maybe they give themselves a better shot week in and week out than we thought. And all of a sudden, maybe instead of flirting with 6 or 7 wins, you're flirting with 8 or 9 wins or better. I'm just telling you, that's a top 10 recruiting program, top 10 portal program. The talent roster that they're going to put on the field is good. It's really good. There's just not an easy out. So I'm refusing to write Oklahoma off because of a questionable position, even one as important as offensive line. There are some players I can't wait to see this year. Lenoris Sellers, at South Carolina. Quarterback there is a kid we did a whole feature on this time last year. I think it may have been the fall. And I said, now he's not starting this year because Spencer Rattler was there. But we kept hearing good things. We kept hearing that the South Carolina staff thought immediately when they got him on campus that, oh, we nailed it with this guy. Well, okay, so we bookmarked that, and now we open the page again, and here we go. It's Lenora Sellers' time. Shane Beamer named him the starting quarterback out of spring ball, and it feels kind of like an inflection point. I don't know if you feel this way about South Carolina, but anytime you play in a conference as loaded as the SEC, and anytime, especially, you do what Beamer did, and they overachieved by like 1 or 2 games in his first 2 seasons, you buy yourself wiggle room to have a bad year like they had last year. All right, so what happens if they have another one versus what happens if they have a really good one? That's called an inflection point, and it vastly and drastically changes what 2025 and beyond feels like. So Lenora Sellers is a really, really big hinge point there. The Bobby Petrino offense in general, he's not a player, but Bobby Petrino, I keep realizing this is not a dream. This man's actually back in Fayetteville. I have, because of storm chasing, I have flown out of Northwest Arkansas, which is one of the great underrated jewel airports of the South, by the way. I have flown out of there a couple of times this spring already, which means I've been in Fayetteville secretly. I was so secret I didn't even tell Trey Biddy I was there. But I've been up there a couple of times, and this is what people are talking about. They have very, very mixed opinions about the team overall, but every one of them says, but, hey, it's Petrino, man. Anything could happen. It's Petrino. Anything could happen. And you know what? History has taught us, in the most literal sense of the phrase, anything can happen with Bobby Petrino. Brock Vandagriff is a kid I'm really excited to watch. At Kentucky, see, I think maybe there are people, for whatever reason, I don't know what's going on in your personal life. I just know that some of you guys somehow don't stay glued to spring football. I know, but there are those amongst us who have lives to live. Sounds terrible to me, but some of you guys have things going on. You may not be aware. Brock Vandagriff transferred to Kentucky. Not only did he transfer there, they got a lot of things happening up there. Kentucky, as I said last year, and got not demonized for it, but I got drugged for it. I said Kentucky feels pretty good about where they are. Well, they did. They feel good again about where they are, and they've made some coaching changes and they've made some philosophy changes. But that quarterback is going to be really important. Devin Leary came in there last year, and there were high hopes for him. I got high hopes for Brock Vandagriff as well. I do too. That's why we're talking about him here. What about Auburn? Auburn, how should I put this? Coming out of spring, I feel like Auburn will be the SEC's most volatile team week to week this year. By volatile, I mean they could lose to a New Mexico State, just as they could take Georgia and Alabama to the wire. Oh, wait, that happened last year. Yes, I think this year could be that again, and it's going to be that way, I think, because of how many young guys they have. They just brought in the number 10 overall recruiting class. I talked to Freeze about this when we had him on the show last month. Here's what he had to say.
So I was walking down the hallway. You guys were walking into a team meeting, and I'm asking folks, hey, who's that? Who's that? Who's that? And every one of them I keep pointing out from an impressive, like, physical standpoint. I keep hearing, oh, that's a freshman. Oh, he's 17. Oh, he's about to be 18. How many of these guys, as much as you can say in spring, are going to play meaningful football for you this year?
More than I desire. But they're going to have to, and I do think they're really talented kids. But, are they ready to step into the SEC and play? Maybe not, but they're going to have to, and we'll see how they do. I mean, the Cam Colemans of the world, he's been really impressive in spring, but, Amaris Williams and Waller at defensive ends are going to have to play some. They're going to give us some minutes for sure. Some inside guys. The DBs, I think, are talented, the young ones. But some of them are going to have to play for sure.
Yeah, so here's the thing about playing young guys. When they look like Cam Coleman, and not many do, they can compete any given week, even in the SEC. And they've got some young guys, he just mentioned them by name in some cases, that are going to start whether they're ready to or not. And they will have random moments where it all comes together and they will look like they are a borderline playoff contender, if not an outright playoff contender. Then they could lay a total egg on you. That is the nature of playing young players. And you know as well as I do, it's probably going to be a week early in the season. They play Alabama A&M, Cal, and New Mexico the first 3 weeks. Those dudes are going to go off. Some combination of them are going to go off. The hype balloon will start to fill, and then you'll realize Oklahoma at Georgia, at Missouri, at Kentucky, Vandy, ULM, and then A&M at Alabama to end the year. It's just the reality of a conference schedule is coming. And so, to me, their over-under win total 7.5. There's a world this year where Auburn wins 7 games and I feel good about it. There could be a world where they win 8 and I don't feel good about it, because if the 4 losses are blowouts versus the 5 losses being close losses, dude, Auburn's not winning a national title this year, so I want to build for the future. Like, I want to see that true freshman class shine. I mean, I want to get what I paid for. Let's just call it what it is. And then I want to feel good about 2025. And I saw a lot of people talking the other day, because Freeze talked about the quarterback position. And he was talking about how they didn't decide to invest in going and getting a quarterback, and they stuck with Peyton Thorne. And really, that translates to, we knew we were more than a quarterback away, and they are more than a quarterback away. And that's okay. You inherit what you inherit. I was talking to a head coach the other day. He said, man, that's the biggest thing that people never pay attention to, is when guys get fired, the public just thinks, oh, everybody got fired because they suck. Well, coaches get fired for all kinds of reasons. Some of them get fired, but they leave behind a whole lot better talent roster than others that get fired. Well, Freeze didn't inherit a good talent roster. Some of these other folks do. Like, some of these other folks, your guy gets fired and he was underachieving with the talent he brought in, but there's some good players there. Freeze did not necessarily have that situation. Mike Elko has that situation. Mike Elko's coming into a place where they got good football players. They can compete this year. I'm just interested to see what the Elko effect is. You know what? I think I know what the Elko effect is. I'm interested to see how tangible that thing is in year one. If I watch Texas A&M any given Saturday, do I feel it? Does it feel different? If you're listening to a random broadcast crew who probably is there once a year or maybe twice a year, is it something they pick up on? How's the fan base feel? The fan base will be well upstream of just the casuals figuring this thing out. There is stuff that Jimbo Fisher was good at, and there's stuff he wasn't very good at. You take the stuff in the bucket of Jimbo wasn't very good at it, and Elko is a master at a lot of that, and it's not all stuff that you see on the surface. But people who know the program intimately, they get it. And they see it really early. He hasn't coached a game there yet. This is the kind of stuff you would see early. There is like, for lack of a better term, there's an Xbox mentality of thinking college football is pretty rudimentary. You go and you get the players, and then you coach them and put them on the field, and they play for you. Well, that's not a team. That's just a bunch of pieces. You got to understand how to make a football team. I think Mike Elko understands how to make a football team. And a lot of that is rolling up your sleeves when no one's looking. And a lot of it is going and sitting down at a dinner you may not necessarily want to be at, but you know it serves the greater good of your program. A lot of it is fostering an environment that guys want to be a part of, and it cultivates them. And sometimes it comes through tough love. It's not always rah-rahing, guys. Sometimes it's tough love, but ultimately, again, it creates a more fertile layer of topsoil so that when you toss those 4- and 5-star seeds in, they actually blossom instead of just sitting there because they were planted in gravel and then they blow away. It's almost like a parable. So, the Mike Elko impact, the Mike Elko effect, year one, what does that look like? 2 coaching performances above and beyond that I got my eye on. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. They go 11-2 last year. Did you hear that, everyone? Missouri won 11 games last year. And yet here they are. They're right back off to the side. Oh, it's Missouri. That was a one-year thing. Well, the quarterback returns. That elite wide receiver returns. They've got a good defense. I told you I think they backfilled some big coaching losses very effectively. And so Missouri is yet again going to be a factor. I believe that. And they're going to be in a lot of close games. And they are very, very well coached. And, unlike some of these guys out there, who kind of watch the portal or NIL process kind of from a distance, and they just kind of show up at the end. Eli Drinkwitz is in the trenches on that stuff. He has to be, and he's really good at it. So that's one. Billy Napier is the other one. We did our show from Florida a few weeks ago, and we had Napier on the show, and I told him. He actually asked me on air, because I said, hey, what is Florida now? He said, well, what do you think Florida is? And I said, well, it feels to me like everyone doubts you, and everyone thinks you're going to fail, and you got the toughest schedule in the country this year. Internally, I don't feel that energy. Internally, it feels really good here. It feels like things are on the right track. If I didn't know any better, I think you won 10 games last year. And I got him to talk about maybe why this year could be different, even in the face of that tough schedule. Here's what he said.
And I would say we're 2 years in, and this is the first offseason where we feel like we're not solving a major problem or building out a system. And it's been great. I think we've been able to focus our time on the things that really matter. It's been a lot of fun. It's by far the best offseason that we've had. We're about halfway through. So it's the best group of players we have, and I'm really excited about the changes that we made, the new staff additions. So far, so good.
Tell you, they got Graham Mertz to come back. And that may not mean anything to a lot of you. Graham Mertz is a very, very important player this year because like I said with Oklahoma, you can either focus on a schedule in totality, and if you do, it's tough. Or you can realize, hey, they play one game a week. All right, so if Florida is incrementally better in a few spots than general public expects them to be, all of a sudden they win a couple of games they're not supposed to. And all of a sudden, Miami comes in there week one. I think it's going to be, there will be an insane amount of focus put on that game for both programs. And way too much will be made of it, but that's why we love college football. So let's just say Florida were to win that game. They got Samford the following week. A&M comes in the week after that. They go to Mississippi State the week after that. You notice about those first two conference games, there is a commonality there. It's two first-year staffs. I just told you I believe and think the world of Mike Elko, but it's a couple of first-year staffs. So what if they start 4-0? What if UCF comes into the swamp after that? What if they were to go into Neyland 5-0? It's unlikely. It's not at all impossible. So at that point, we would have one of those situations where the back half of the schedule is tougher. And so even in the best case, if Florida were to start undefeated, you'd have a bunch of people apologizing to Billy Napier, then he'd lose a game, then they would throw him under the bus again, then he'd win a game, and they'd pull his limp body out from under the bus, and it would be one of those up and down, week to week, hot seat. Oh, hot seat's cooled. Oh, it's red hot again. Foolishness, but it happens. So that is a coaching performance that I'm excited to watch. Now, Texas, we were there last week. And we did our show live from Austin. We sat down with Sark. He covered a multitude of different things. But I am a believer that Texas is entering the SEC in Tier 1 of the SEC. And that's something I don't think people thought would be the case when we heard the headline a couple of years ago at SEC Media Days. We all of a sudden find out OU and Texas are joining in 2024. A lot of people slyly grinned and said, oh, they're about to find out about the SEC. Well, hey, maybe they are. Maybe you're going to find out about OU and Texas. But I bet you didn't think that Texas was going to pull out one of those head table chairs. You probably thought they were going to be B tier and may have to work their way up. Well, you look at the energy, you look at the attitude, you look at the talent roster. Most specifically, there are few equals to Texas, if any, in this conference. In fact, you go back a couple of years and compare it to now, just the offensive line. Listen to what Sark said the other day.
There was a time not too long ago where you guys couldn't even do spring games as you wanted because the depth chart was a wreck.
Yeah.
And now this past spring, you guys had one of the most entertaining spring games because you could go at it the way you want to. Can you please, like in layman's terms for the folks at home and me, describe how different the depth is here compared to what you inherited?
Well, just that was year one, year two. We couldn't play a spring game, and the reason was I would have 7, maybe 8 offensive linemen total that could physically go compete in a game. This year in spring practice, we had 17 to 19 to 20 I mean, when you start adding up the walk-ons and so on and so forth. So now you can play a real game. And that goes across the board, whether it's having enough receivers, having enough defensive linemen. Now, I think a couple things have contributed to that. One, I think we've structured our roster in a way to where we have equality in depth across the board. It's not just one or two position groups that are loaded. We've kind of assembled it in a way that is lateral. But two, I think the portal has helped that.
What is happening? As I sit here, I'm watching the live chat because I don't have anything better to do when those Sots are playing. 2 people just said Texas is overrated. They just went to the playoff last year. So anyway, we have to ask, anytime the O word is thrown out, not off-season, but overrated. Anytime overrated is thrown around, 2 questions. 1, what is Texas rated? I don't know. The polls aren't even out. Number 2, what should they be rated? They weren't overrated last year. They were one of the 4 teams in the playoff. So what should they be rated? Anyway, I move on. How about the quarterback depth at Texas? I guess that's overrated as well. Tennessee will have their best team under Josh Heupel this year. Tennessee's over-under win total is 9.5. I think he's got his best quarterback there in Nico. Checks all the boxes mentally and physically. They have complete and full confidence in him to lead the program. Sneaky good defense, sneaky good defensive staff. At Oklahoma, September 21st is going to be one of the most entertaining games in the conference this year. It is where Heupel played. I don't think there's much love lost. And I think that that's also their opener. If I'm not mistaken, and Colin would know, I think that's their opener in conference play. And I also think, Jesse, check me on this. I think I'm right. I think that's Oklahoma's introduction into the SEC is playing Tennessee at home. I don't know what the rest of the schedule looks like that day, but I, in highly and embarrassingly documented fashion, have never been to an Oklahoma game, which is something I have to rectify. I just have to. I shouldn't have a bucket list for game attendance because I get to go where I want every week, and yet I do. Because somehow, some way, we've missed a game at Oklahoma. So, yeah. Tennessee this year. Tennessee could be a legitimate, I'm going to stop short of saying that. I don't want to say that. I don't want to have said that in May. A bona fide playoff contender. How about that? Their preseason win total is 9.5. That's the same as Bama, LSU, Ole Miss, Missouri, Tennessee. And yet, I know good and well Ole Miss and Alabama will probably get more run than Tennessee will. But they shouldn't, because Tennessee is a legit player this year, I think. Also, and this doesn't have anything to do with any one team in particular, and this could be its own segment, really, but the whole "you are what your record says you are" mantra has always been a lie in college football, but it's really going to get tested this year. You are hardly ever just what your record says you are in this sport. So I've been a big believer in that. That's one of the big lies about college football. But I want you to think about something as we wrap this part of the show up. I want you to think about how you think the playoff's going to go. So think about how you believe the expanded playoff's going to go. And I think one of your biggest fears, for many of you, knowing you like I think I do, a lot of your biggest fears are, yeah, we're going to 12 teams in the playoff, but the SEC is just going to get a ton of teams in. Well, that's your biggest fear. It actually may be worse, okay? That's not the worst thing that could happen. The worst thing that could happen is the committee misinterprets strength of schedule, strength of record, whatever you want to go by, and they actually end up screwing some SEC teams, and the SEC gets pissed about it, and they end up resolving in their mind, hey, a couple of years down the road from now, maybe Big Ten wants to come, maybe they don't, but we're going to do something about this, because here's what's going to happen. The SEC and the Big Ten are perennially going to play the toughest schedules in the country. The SEC will probably end up playing a tougher schedule on average than anyone will. And as a result, 9-3 in that conference could be equal to 10-2 or 11-1 in some other conferences. And if you get down to what we would call nut cutting time at the end of the year, and the committee looks and says, we can't put 9-3 teams in over 10-2 and 11-1 teams, they're going to get asked why. And if they say record, then the SEC is going to look back and say, do you have any idea who our teams are playing versus who their teams are playing? And if that committee says, we don't care, you are what your record says you are, that piece of paper is going to get wadded up and thrown in their faces, and the SEC will eventually, somehow, some way, figure out how to take matters into their own hands. Saying all that to say this, and apologies to Meemaw for saying nut cutting on air, but I'm saying all that to say this. There is going to be a lesson learned or taught, either way, this year when it comes to how strength of schedule is interpreted by that committee. And I have no clue how it's going to work, because you can say it all you want to. You can say a 9-3 SEC team may be better than or more deserving than a 10-2 or 11-1. But remember the climate. We just had Florida State left out in favor of a one-loss SEC team. And a lot of people got bent out of shape about it, as they should. They got every right to. And so camps have already formed on this as a concept. So then if we get forward and we have SEC teams maybe with 2 more losses, I just want you to think about it. What if an SEC team, we're looking at that final seat at the table, and there is a 9-3. What if Florida this year? Just think this out loud with me. What if Florida went 9-3 this year against, by a mile, the toughest schedule in the country? And at the end of the day, we've got them, or we've got an 11-1 Sun Belt team, or a Big 12 team for that matter, or an AAC team for the final seat at the playoff table. Who are you putting in there? A lot of you hate the SEC, so that's what will constitute your answer. But think about it as a committee member. 9-3 team, 11-1 team. You really willing to do it? Because if you're not, I'm just somehow, some way, I think that conference would end up taking matters into their own hands down the road. And I don't know what that means either. But they're not about to sit back, play a tougher schedule, and then get screwed out of spots they believe to be theirs. Whether you agree with it or not, that's how that will go.